Hello again. We're going to be going over chapter 3. Again, please pull up the PowerPoint along with my presentation. That way you can follow along. I hope that you've read the chapter. It'll make this presentation a lot easier to follow. So today we're going to be talking about who plays sports and what happens to them after they play sports. So go ahead to the first slide. So becoming and staying involved in sports. There's a lot of things that are connected to the individuals who decide to play and that who continue to play. A couple things that I point out here, it depends on the person's ability, the characteristics of that individual, and the resources that they have. Additionally, what kind of people are influencing them? Their significant others, families, friends, what influence do they have on them? And then the availability of opportunities to play and enjoy sports. So there has to be the actual opportunity to play an activity, or for example, women's lacrosse isn't even in the state of Iowa yet. So to play lacrosse and enjoy it is very difficult because we don't even offer it here yet, except for at the collegiate level. Go ahead to the next slide. Why individuals play sports. So the process of becoming and staying involved, again, this is kind of repetitive, but really discusses the abilities, the resources, the role of significant others, and the opportunities to play. What role does family play? So what I want you to do right now is maybe just jot down like a sentence or two. Did your family impact your ability to play? Were they supportive? Were they not supportive? Did you have siblings that were involved in sports before you were? How about cousins? Did your family drive you to practices? All of those things. What type of role did your family have? My family and my sports experience, was quite impactful. My dad was heavily involved in athletics, so he pushed us and put us in sports right away. Basketball, volleyball, and all of those things. So I would say my family had a big role in me participating in athletics. Go ahead to the next slide. To participate or not. So basically, when an individual sits down and decides, should I play a sport or should I not? They look at, the connection between participation, the goals, life interests in things. Are they going to gain recognition? Are they going to be able to show their skill? Are they talented in the sport? Do they have the time, the money? You'll hear a lot of students, especially once you get to, high school and college, they don't have the time. They have to work a job. They want to focus on their academics, memories of past experience, and that can be both positive and negative. So if you have, really wonderful memories of playing a certain sport, it's going to be more difficult to give that up. Images from the social world, so things that you see every single day, you see constantly in your face soccer, then you might be more inclined to to play it later on. Go ahead to the next slide. Oops, let me go back here. So being accepted as an athlete, there are 4 phases in order to be accepted as an athlete, to have that identity as an athlete. So you have to have an understanding of the sport. You got to know how to play it. You know the rules, you know the professional teams, all of those kind of logistical things. How you interact with others. What type of teammate are you? How do you communicate with others? Learning the expectations of the sport, okay? And then being recognized. Go to the next slide. Changing or ending sports participation. So, past research indicates a couple of different things. People don't just cut ties from sports forever. So let's say, someone decides, I don't want to play high school sports anymore. They're still involved in some capacity. And at the collegiate level, what I've seen a lot when young women, specifically with soccer, don't want to play anymore. They want to be managers. They still want to be connected to the team. They want to, film. They want to do something with the team. So you don't completely cut out sports just because maybe you don't play them anymore. Dropping out is tied to other changes and transitions in personal life. Again, it's not always a negative thing. They don't always quit or decide not to play because they don't like something. It just might be that they decide they like something more, or they move, or they don't have the money, or they need to worry about their academics. There's all sorts of reasons why people end their participation. Kind of leads right into what I was just about to say is, dropping out isn't always due to negative experiences. I think a lot of times people think when individuals quit sports is because they didn't like their coach, they didn't get enough playing time. That really isn't the case. It's not always negatively associated. Dropping out may cause problems among those who, identify totally in sports. I've had athletes in the past who were unable to play, due to all sorts of reasons, injuries for one, career-ending injury. It was very difficult for them to stop because they were identified as an athlete. This was who they are, and if they don't play sports, who are they as a person? They also might lack the social support and the material resources that are no longer provided if they decide to end playing sports. You can go to the next slide. Let's talk about burnout. Huge buzzword. I hear it through athletes all the time. Oh, they're burnt out. Oh, they're burnt out. Understand what burnout really means. So burnout is from participating in high performance sports. So, very highly competitive. We're going to talk about things like power and performance coming up, and power and performance sports are driven by competition. You must win, being the best that you can. This burnout occurs when athletes feel they've lost control of their lives. So the sport has literally taken over every component of their life. They start to get stressed out. They're not having fun doing it anymore. They feel like they're missing out on things, and it feels like work. That's when the burnout starts to happen. To prevent burnout, athletes need to feel like they're in control to some degree, that they have the capacity to make some decisions, and it's not just always being forced upon them. Provide stress management techniques, teaching athletes how to balance things, academics, friends, and the sport. But again, burnout, sometimes that's a word that people use very easily on athletes. Oh, they were burnt out. They were burnt out. Well, these types of athletes needed to be playing at a high level, okay, highly competitive level, and really in order to be classified as somebody who's been burnt out. You can go to the next slide. So these next couple slides, they're going to talk about the different research that individuals have done on sports participation. And the book really, really details each of these researches, and I just kind of briefly touch on all of them. So ending or reducing sport participation is associated with needing a job and becoming independent, realistic judgment about sports skills. Sometimes athletes just know they're not very good anymore, or they're not going to be the best at it, or they may not make the team, and they just decide, what, I don't want to waste my time doing this when I know I'm not good enough to do it anymore. You go ahead to the next slide. So these next findings, talk about when competitive sports careers end, the main challenges faced by athletes. So we're talking about, like high level, Division I-esque when their careers end. Reinvesting the time and energy in activities and relationships. I even see this at the Division III level, where my athletes, when they graduate, they have a difficult time. They're not preparing for the fall anymore. So how do I work out? What do I do with all this extra free time? I don't have this, I don't have that. So it's just really kind of prioritizing and readjusting how you put that energy. Reconnecting with family members and friends. Returning to school or continuing, your careers. You can go to the next slide. Being involved in sports, there's some assumptions that are made. In some cultures, people mistakenly believe that playing sport automatically gives you positive traits. Okay, and we're going to continue to talk about this. Do sports build character? And I'm sure all of you right now, your gut response would be like, yes, coach, it definitely builds character. That's not always the case. And just because you play sports doesn't necessarily mean it's going to allow you or teach you to be a good person. So this slide here, essentially right now what I'd like you to do is really ask yourself, in your opinion, in your experience, do sports build character? Nice, simple yes, okay, or no. And again, I think you're going to find it's not as clear of an answer as you thought. So we'll go to the next slide. Factors often overlooked when you're talking about building characters in individuals through sports. Sports participation, the experiences, remember we talked about this earlier, they're diverse and they can be positive and negative. You can learn some really bad things through sports. Selection process and organizations favor some characteristics over others. So some characteristics, winning at all costs, okay, that you're going to be a fighter, you're going to do whatever it takes. Depending on the environment, that might not be a good thing. Meaning given to the sport experience will vary from the athletes. The lessons that are learned and lessons that are applied vary, widely. Again, we've already talked about this, but it really depends on the environment that they have. We have a class right now of a bunch of different individuals, and I'm sure all of you have had different sport experiences, even different than mine. So that's really going to impact the type of person that you've become, your viewpoints, And again, it might not always be a positive thing. You can head to the next slide. Meaning given to the sports, participation changes with time. You have to understand, even as a coach, as I continue to get older, my views on, a team and the sport environment, they've adjusted compared to when I was, a young coach 10 years ago. Social relationships and sports experiences and the meaning that are given to them, socialization that occurs in sports may also occur in other activities. So just because you're not playing a sport doesn't mean you can't learn teamwork, doesn't mean you can't learn cooperation or how to be a leader. So I think sometimes there's this perception that when you're involved in sports, these are the certain characteristics that you're going to learn. And if you're not involved in sports, you're not going to learn those. Well, that's not the case. There's other activities that would also provide those same type of, life skills. You can go to the next slide. The positive effects of sports. And I think this is pretty obvious, the opportunities to explore and identify yourself and, learn about who you are, kind of put yourself under adversity and all of those things to, really push the limits of, who you are not only physically but mentally. Knowledge building skills that go beyond the locker room and the playing field. So again, how you have relationships with people. On our current soccer team, we talk a lot about, taking accountability for your actions. So that someday when you're in the workforce and, you have to be evaluated, you can fairly evaluate yourself. So just learning some of those life skills that are going to help you someday, way past being on the field or the court. You get new relationships with people. Obviously, some of your best friends can be people that you play with. I have wonderful relationships with my players, so you have a good relationship with coaches and managers, athletic trainers. So, there's some really positive things that, come out of being involved in a team. You can go to the next slide. Examples of how to learn lessons, applied in non-sport situations. So, talking about like a referee, for example, making bad calls. Like how can you communicate with somebody when you don't agree with what they are, putting in front of you? Being able to confront conflict with, peers that are of your same age. How do you lead people that, are of similar age? All those kind of things that you can use in the future. Opportunities to develop and display, competence and non-activities. Again, kind of getting linked to mentors and people that you're close with, okay? Go to the next slide. So earlier I mentioned, and go ahead, get everything up on here. So there's, 6 points under each of them. We're going to discuss power and performance and pleasure and participation. There's a vast difference between the two. Again, these are key terms that we're going to be discussing a lot throughout the semester. I'll be discussing them a lot. I'll be using, power and performance sports as an example. I'll say, hey, this is a power and performance sport, this is a power and performance situation, or this is a pleasure and participation. So please make sure that you have an understanding of the difference of the two. So let's first talk about power in performance sports. So basically in these types of sports, you're pushing your limits. You're doing whatever it takes to win. Excellence is, proven through winning the game. So if you don't win the game, you're not excellent, essentially. Your body is a tool or a weapon. You're going to use your body to get the outcome, okay? So in whatever it takes. Competence is based on inclusion and exclusion, okay? So if you're not good enough, we're going to exclude you from the team. Not everybody's allowed to do power and performance sports. You have to be good enough to do them. Hierarchy structure, so, a good example would be, I have a boss who's an AD, then it's me, then it's my assistants, and then it's our captains, then it's the rest of the teammates, and everyone knows, kind of their role. Then there's the first years who are, below everyone. There's this structure that you have to follow, and the ones that are making the decisions are the ones that are at the highest level, okay? Your opponents are your enemies. You do not like your opponents. You look at them in a very disdain type of way, okay? Now, the difference when we're talking about, pleasure and participation sports, they're going to emphasize more on connections between people. They're going to look for enjoyment and doing it for health reasons and just having fun when they're playing. Their body is a source of pleasure, so they're going to do it to feel good about themselves, to make others feel happy. It's all about inclusion and making sure everybody feels that they are welcome. Anybody can do it. It's not just for the top athletes. It's going to be more of a democratic structure, so everybody has a say. Everybody can have their input on the situation. And then you compete with others. So you're not just competing against them, but they're your friends. And you see it more as, hey, we're going to all go out here and have fun. So think to yourself right now, I'm not going to, I'll give you a few here in a second, examples of power and performance sports. Think of some pleasure and participation sports. Obviously power and performance sports, you're looking at varsity level high school teams, club teams, all college sports, the highest level, the NFL, NBA, all of those. Pleasure and participation, you're looking at intramurals, pickup games, YMCA leagues, different activities that, after work, softball leagues, even though some of the softball leagues I was in with work people have been very competitive, but those are still the same thing, those kind of pleasure and participation. Running, okay, so, half marathons, all of those things, you're competing with everyone and it's more of a positive environment. Go ahead to the next slide. So sports participation and health. Health benefits decline in competitive sports. So when you have this idea of like, oh, I play sports, so it's going to help me be healthy. Well, that's not always the case because there's so many more injuries that are involved with highly competitive, those performance and power sports. Health costs related to them also, skyrocket when you're talking about broken bones and concussions and surgeries. So, there's not always a health benefit. There's some sports that, obviously are under a lot of scrutiny right now. Football being one of them, soccer, hockey, due to all the injuries that all the head injuries that are occurring. Specifically, violence, the risk-taking, and unhealthy lifestyles is the last one I didn't touch on. So eating disorders, drinking, you see sometimes in extreme sports where they're trying to cut a lot of weight and they're, doing things like sweating and, getting on bikes and, taking pills and all that other kind of stuff. So there are, some real health risks when you're participating in sports. Go to the next slide. Sports affect our lives. So studies through the voice of the participants, studies through social worlds, studies through, social locations. So these are the three different ways that you can see how sports affect our lives. We could look and speak to the participants. So again, sit down my soccer team and talk to them. What's your experience like at Wartburg? What is it like being on the women's soccer team? What are your relationships like? What's the structure? What type of, expectations do you have on? So you could hear from the participants themselves. You could also do studies just looking at like Wartburg Athletic Department. How does it function? Who runs who gets what? How does this world, this social world of Wartburg Athletics work? What does each team look like? What is the makeup of the coaches? And then there's also, through social locations. So the Midwest. What does soccer look like in the Midwest compared to the East Coast? And who's participating? Why aren't they participating? So there's a lot of different ways you can explore how sports affect our lives. Go to the next slide. Sports, presenting ideas and beliefs. So sports are, a site for struggling for how we think and do things. In a good example I can give you, 8th grade year, went to this big club basketball tournament. We played the championship game at Carver Hawkeye Arena, the Iowa Hawkeyes basketball court, like on the court. It was awesome. Again, we were playing for first or second place, and one of the coaches really believed we should play fair playing time because this was an experience most of us would never get. And the other one said, well, we're there to win. And, there was a conflict there for sure. So, that we struggle on how we think and we should do sports. Sports are sites where people create and learn stories. They use this as a meaning and to make sense of the world. So, people who do things the right way will eventually win. So just because they're doing things the wrong way, someday it'll come back and bite them. I've heard those types of stories. So we try to justify how things are done, through stories and the things that we've learned through sports. Sports consist of vocabularies and images that often support dominant ideology. Again, we use certain words related to sport. Work hard, be accountable. If you put the time in, the results are going to happen. Be a good teammate. There's no I in team. All of those things we preach all the time in sports, which then often support the ideas of how we're supposed to function every day in society. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so from here, I think what you need to take away is that participating in sports varies from person to person. And I want you to really think about, why did you participate in sports? why don't you participate in sports? And, you know, be able to integrate that in some of your conversations that you have through your discussion questions this week. Again, we've gone over chapter 1 and chapter 3. There's a quiz in the next couple days. You'll have your discussion questions to answer, and then your personal learning post at the end of the week. I'd really like to see in your personal learning post, you know, some of these things integrated. Why did you participate in sports? Why didn't you participate? What do you think influenced you to play, not play? And then any key terms or new vocabulary that we've discussed that maybe you hadn't thought of or is new to you, or, you know, was just eye-opening as well. So this is week 1. If you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks.